So lighting compliance checks. Some of you might be familiar with that, what that means. Some of you might not be. In the case that you don't know what a lighting compliance check is, don't worry, you're in the right place, in the right space. I will guide you through what a lighting compliance check is. All right. So for today's agenda, we're going to break it down in 5 different points. We're going to talk about the what. We're going to talk about the why, who, when, and how. Now, what does that turn into? So what is a lighting compliance check? Why are lighting compliance checks important? Who should be doing lighting compliance checks? When should we be doing lighting compliance checks? And how do we check for a lighting compliance check? And for my completionists out there that are wondering where the other questions are, I do have them. I'm prepared. So we have where, whom, and how much. I'm not going to spend too much time on these last 3 topics, but I can answer them real quickly. Where, you can do lighting compliance checks from your favorite location, whether that's the office, that's home, that is the Bahamas, Dominican Republic, wherever you are. As long as you have an internet connection, you can do a lighting compliance check. Whom? It's for the QA/QC review. This is the person that wants to see this lighting COMcheck report. And then how much? You will be happy to know that it won't set you back any money, just your sanity. All right. What is a lighting compliance check? A lighting compliance check is simply a way to make sure that the lighting design is up to code, particularly to make sure that we meet energy requirements. I'm sure that as soon as I said code, Dave's ears perked up and he was wondering which codes. For that, we have to look at ASHRAE 90.1, which a lot of us are familiar with, particularly section 9, which talks about lighting. You can see a little snippet of the code here. And we can also factor in IECC, section C405. These are the 2 codes that we need to keep in mind when doing the lighting compliance checks. Now, as for goals, what are we trying to accomplish with the lighting compliance check? Primarily, we want to make sure that the lighting design is within the LPD, the lighting power density. For now, all you need to know about lighting power density is that it's wattage over square feet. We will talk a little bit more about that later on. Lighting compliance check can be used to optimize our lighting design. In the case that we go over the allowed requirements by the code, we can use that information to compare it to what the code says and optimize the design a little bit more. And finally, but not least important, we also can use this lighting compliance check to generate documents that will go for permit and inspection. Right? Why are lighting compliance checks important? Well, as I just mentioned, we need to comply with ASHRAE and IECC codes. We can also use the information we get from a lighting compliance check in order to compare against what the code says and potentially optimize the lighting design. And very important, it is also required for your QA/QC process. This is, without a doubt, the most important thing to our particular application. As you can see from our electrical CD checklist, COMcheck report is mandatory. So make sure that you generate your COMcheck report. All right, who should be doing a lighting compliance check? I have recruited the help of Uncle Sam to tell us exactly who should be doing a lighting compliance check. That is you. Everybody in this room should be familiar, should be comfortable with being able to produce a lighting compliance check report. Don't worry, if you don't know how to, again, I'm going to walk you right through. Now, more importantly in this particular topic is who should be deciding the energy code. Now, this is important to talk about because the energy code isn't something that's going to affect just electrical. The energy code will be affecting mechanical, architectural, electrical, and will affect every discipline involved with the team. So it is important that this is a conversation that is had, 1, amongst everybody, and 2, early on in the project. Ideally, this is something that we want to be doing during SDs, along with determining the compliance path. These 2 tasks, energy code and compliance path, are 2 things that should be decided early on in the project. If they don't get done in SDs, we want to make sure that this is covered during EDs early on. And in the case of projects that started CDs, like Merck, we want to make sure that these 2 things are decided upon before designing anything that will be affected by the energy code. All right. Now, when should we be doing a lighting compliance check? That's pretty easy. If your project involves any kind of lighting scope, we want to be doing a lighting compliance check. In this, I have 2 examples here of some of my favorite projects in the world. Up top, we have Merck Substation 204, which is a completely new building, completely from the ground up, new building, new lights. That's going to need a lighting compliance check. Down here, we have Pan 700 Walnut Street, which is a renovation to an existing space. As you can see, only some of the rooms are within lighting scope. And these rooms have the lights renovated, they have the lights changed, which means that it also requires a lighting compliance check. So, if your project has any lighting scope, it will need a lighting compliance check. Now, in terms of how we do a lighting compliance check, this is where we get into the fun things. So we're going to be using a software called COMcheck. COMcheck is a tool designed by the Department of Energy that allows us to analyze interior and exterior light. It can also be used for the building envelope and mechanical compliance. And the important thing that we do with this software is check for compliance and print a report that says that we meet compliant energy codes. There are two versions of COMcheck. We have a desktop version and we have a web-based version. Desktop, you would go to this website, you download it, install it on your local machine, you can use it. Web-based, you don't need to install anything, you simply go online and use that application. Now, since you see there are two options, I'm sure you're thinking, oh, which one should I be using? Someone might tell you it comes down to preference, it depends what you prefer, what you don't. I'm here to tell you that is not entirely the case. We are going to be primarily using the web-based version. And here are some reasons as to why the web version is better than the desktop version. For one, you don't have to download on it or install anything. Everything is online. You can also, you have access to cloud storage, so you can save your projects directly on the web base. You don't need to keep downloading things and uploading them, but you can. This is an option once you've created your account, you register, you can import projects, you can download them. You get to save a bunch of different projects online. And the important thing is this project sharing. Because it's online, we don't need to necessarily download the file, send it to someone else, and then be sharing the file back and forth. We can simply log into one account and access the project entirely online. So it makes collaboration a little bit easier. And then this snippet is from the website, which lists some of the things that I talked about and why you should be using the web version. Also important is the fact that we have instant access to the latest energy codes. By using the online version, because you simply refresh, you have the latest version available, no need to download updates, everything is already there. All right. Now we finally get a look at what the COMcheck software looks like. So I'm going to be focusing on the web version. I'm going to be focusing on the web version primarily. And this is, once you've logged in, this is what the application looks like. So a couple of things to note real quick. Up here is where we log in. If you don't have an account, we will register, create an account, project title. These tabs are here to separate the project information. And for our applications, we'll be looking at interior lighting, exterior lighting, and then these requirements. Over here, we have the section where we specify the code and location of our project, some additional project information, and then here's where we will be doing the majority of our work. Now here as well is where we will check for compliance once everything is properly set. So don't worry if it seems a little intimidating, it really isn't. We're gonna break it down step by step. So let's take a look at the workflow. So we're gonna run through basically how to set up the COMcheck, how to go about creating this report in about 10 steps. So first of all, we need to access the software, right? So we're gonna start a new project. You simply go to this website, you'll be greeted by this web page, and then all you have to do is click this button and you're logged in. Step one down, pretty easy. Next thing, we register for an account. Again, pretty simple. You hit register unless you already have an account. You simply log in. Hit register. It'll ask you for an email address. You just create a password. Click register. Boom. Done. Easy. This COMcheck stuff is easy. All right. Now we get into some fun things. For the code selection, as we mentioned earlier, right? This is a discussion that happens early on in the project's lifespan. Once we know we have this information available, we go to this code selection location. We click on the drop-down menu, and we will be greeted with all these options. As you can see, we have ASHRAE 90.1, multiple different versions across the years, and likewise for IECC. So you will select the correct energy code. Then you will select the state and the city. If you're doing work for Merck, you would most likely be selecting New Jersey or Rahway, and so on and so forth. Now, it is very important that from the get-go, you select the correct code and the correct state and city, as COMcheck will use this information in order to generate the LPDs that we talked about earlier. That's how COMcheck knows which spaces will have what amount of wattage per square foot allowed. All right? So now, we continue setting up the project. So we're gonna give the project a title. I suggest that we keep the names consistent with our internal naming for the project. So if you go to Deltek, you look up the project name. If you're doing, say Merck, it'll say the project number. It'll say medium voltage substation 204. Name it that so we can keep the naming conventions consistent. This icon right next to the project title is to download the file. This is something we will be using later on. Now, below, if you go back real quick, below this code section, there is this section for project type. So here we have to specify if the project is a new construction, if it's an addition or an alteration. New construction is pretty self-explanatory. You have a new building, new construction. Addition and alteration may sound a little confusing, but keep in mind that these options are relevant to the building itself. So if you're making a new building, new construction. If you're for addition, if you have your existing building and you're adding, say, another wing, another level to the building, if you're creating space, physical volume to the building, that's addition. And if it's just a renovation where no additional building is being added, we stick with alteration. Next, we're going to enter project information. We're going to click here, edit project details. And we're going to be prompted with this window where we will specify the site, address, location. We will specify the owner, and we will specify us as the designers. And once we input all that information, it will look something like this. So this is a COMcheck report that Aaron generated for Penn Medicine for that 700 Walnut project. So you can see we have the code up here. We have the name of the project, type of project, and then the site, the owner, and then us as the designer.
Are interior and exterior the same project?
Yes, so for you mean interior and exterior lighting?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we set up the project, we actually can do both of them in the same space. You don't need to set up a different COMcheck file for interior or exterior. Great. Yeah, and we will get to that in just a second. All right, so this is basically the legwork for setting up the project. This is every bit of information you need to input. Any questions with it? I think it's pretty self-explanatory at this point. Okay. If you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me at any point. All right, so now we get into the fun stuff. So now that we have the project correctly set up, we need to start specifying the spaces within the project, all right? So in that sensor window that we were looking at before, we're gonna wanna click interior lighting method and areas. And then, as you see, we are prompted with yet another choice. We have to select between building area or space by space method. I'm sure you're wondering, what do each of these mean? So, really simply, building method will take the entirety of the space that you're working in. It'll consider it as one single unit. So say you have a building that's primarily offices, you would stick with picking office as your area category. And you would go about the COMcheck treating the entirety of that project space as one type of area, which in this case would be offices. As you might imagine, this makes it so that the COMcheck is a lot quicker, since you won't have to break it down by every area. You just select the whole thing, get the whole square footage, and then use one area type. The space by space method allows us to break down into multiple areas. So say that your building that we're talking about has offices. It has open offices and closed offices, corridors, bathrooms. There's a bunch of different categories of areas that we can account for. And each of them have their own allotted LPDs. So for now, take my word that the space by space method is our preferred method. That's what we're gonna stick with. I will show you later on why that is the case. All right. So we select space by space method, and then we can click add area category. And here we will get a list of all the different spaces that we can add to the project. It's broken down by building type. So primarily we will be focusing on common spaces. This is where most of the spaces we will need are gonna live at. Anything like an office, a corridor, mechanical spaces, computer rooms, all of that can be found here. But occasionally we might go into stuff like healthcare facilities for patient rooms, blood draws, things like that. Right? So once we've selected the building category, we click the drop down, we pick the room we want, and then we click add area category. So now we need to repeat that same process for each of the area types within our building, within the space that we're working. So we want to make sure that we go through, we set up every different area category. Now, very important, you do not need to make an entry for every single room in the building. So if you have four offices, you do not need to make an entry for each of those offices. You can make one entry, so let's take a look right here. You can make one entry, and then all you have to do when you total the area is just take the area of each of these rooms, combine it, and report it as one. All right? So make sure that we have all of the area categories listed out that we're gonna need. And then in area description, we wanna give that information so that we can easily recognize on the COMcheck report what rooms we're accounting for. Usually this is just gonna be straight from our floor plans, name, and then the number. Put that in there so that it's easy to determine what we're looking at. And then make sure you fill the area information. This area information you can get from Revit. You can also use Bluebeam to sketch it out. That might take a little more time. And then finally, we also want to take a look at this. As you can see, COMcheck has taken the liberty of filling this information out from us. That information, that LPD, comes from the energy code, and COMcheck just makes it easy by auto-filling that for us based on the selection we made of the site. Right? So this is what the COMcheck report looks like for that area category. So you can see, this is again for the pen project that we were looking at before. We have, this is the description right here. So if we were looking at this example, this area description is what shows up before. Then it tells you the office type, it tells you square footage, it tells you your LPDs, and then it multiplies both of these columns to generate this number right here, which is how much wattage we are allowed for the project. This is how much wattage we can put into the design of what we're doing. Okay. In the event that your project also has exterior lighting, as Mike pointed out earlier, we can use both interior and exterior within the same file. There's no need to make a completely new file for this. It's just a different tab next to interior lighting, and it differs from interior in that you're not selecting, we're not per se selecting a category, we're selecting a zone first of all. So we need to select the zone based on a couple of different regulations, metrics. 0 underdeveloped areas, 1 for rural, 2 for residential, 3 for typical commercial areas. This 3, LC3 is usually what we will stick with. This is the most common type. And then LC4 for high activity urban areas like a city metropolitan area.
Who defines that plate architecture?
Sorry?
Who defines that?
I believe that energy code covers these zones. Right? But in terms of what actually applies to your project, there's a couple of ways of going about that. The easiest would be, once again, have a conversation with the team, determine what kind of exterior zone we are working with. Yeah. Okay. Once we have selected our zone, we can click Add Exterior Area. We are going to select the lighting area type, and depending on what you select, you will have to input different information. If you pick ATM, rather than a square footage, it's going to ask you how many ATM machines are present in that space. And this is, again, going back to the code, there's a certain allowance per ATM machine. Same with windows, depends on how many windows you have, and then stuff like driveway and a loading area will be based on square footage. Once you've selected your lighting area, you input the information that is required, and then you make sure that every zone is accounted for. Similar to how we set up the interior spaces, we want to make sure the exterior spaces are also all accounted. All right. 7 steps in, and we can finally talk about lighting. So the next step, once we've set up our project, we've set up our spaces, we can finally start adding lights and start getting to the actual calculation part of a lighting project. So I'm going to focus on interior lighting for now, since that is usually what most of our projects will see. So we were in this project tab, that's where we set everything up. So now that we have all our spaces, we can go into interior lighting, and here we are going to add lights into each of these spaces. So all we have to do is we click on this, highlight it, and then we go to the add row, and we look for the specific fixture type that we need. Most of our cases, we're going to be using LEDs, but double check. You never know who still wants to use fluorescent. So once we click LED, we're going to be greeted with this table. All you have to do here is click on Other, and then create an LED. As opposed to selecting any of these other options, these are predetermined. They have assigned wattages that might not be as customizable as we need, so we stick with them. Okay, so now here's where a little bit of the legwork comes in. We have to make sure that each of these rooms have every specific lighting fixture type that is associated with it. So say, for example, we have one electrical mechanical room. Say there's one fixture in that mechanical room. Let's call it A1. So there's a couple of things we need to do with that A1. One, we need to make sure that that is the only fixture type in there. And then we need to make sure we count how many fixtures, how many A1 fixtures are within this space. If it's one room, pretty simple, right? You look at the room, count them off, report. Now, say we have a patient. Say that the patient rooms aren't exactly one-to-one. Say that they differ a little bit. Say one patient room only has one fixture. And then patient room 2 has 2 types of fixtures. We need to account for both of those within any space category that we're reporting. All right, so if the first patient room has, let's say, one downlight, you would put here D1 and fill out the information for that downlight if it's present in any of the rooms as well. And then if one of the patient rooms has a linear fixture, then you would report that here. Even though that fixture doesn't apply to, say, the other 3 rooms, we still report it all together because we're reporting the area category as one single unit. Does that make sense? Okay, perfect. So once we have accounted for every fixture type related to every area type, every area category, we then want to go in and input some information. So first thing I recommend doing is inputting a fixture ID, or you can actually edit this right here. This is going to be whatever fixture, whatever name we've given the fixture on the plan, on the RCP, the lighting plans. We want to call that either here or here so that we can keep track of that. We want to give the fixture a description. This can be something as simple as 2x2 panel, linear fixture, something that, again, description wise. We then want to report how many lamps per fixture, how many number of fixtures are within this given space, and then the wattage for that fixture. All this information you would get from a cut sheet or from a cut sheet and counting the fixtures on the plan as well. But I'm sure that as I described everything that we're supposed to input here, you might have thought, this information sounds familiar. I've collected this information in some format before. And you would be right. You've probably done this for a lighting fixture schedule. So I'm going to give you a pro tip. And that pro tip is use the lighting fixture schedule. You've already created a table that has basically all the information you're going to need here. Use it. So once we have all that information inputted, this is what it would look like on the report. So we have the area category, we have the name that we've assigned, this is gonna be that description we had, right? So then for the fixtures, LED 1 is just what the COMcheck will name it. L2 is the fixture ID. This is the description, and then as you can see all the information we input. What we want, the most important thing out of this table is this number at the end. So based on the number of fixtures and the fixture wattage, COMcheck will multiply these two columns. It'll give you how much wattage is allowed per area category, and then it'll total that out. And this number is how much wattage we can put into the project, right? Within the given space, within all the constraints we've inputted, that's how much wattage we can account for in our project. Okay. So now that we have all the information inputted, right? We have project information, we have spaces, we have the lights present. Now we can finally take a step back and see, okay, does this meet energy code requirements? Are we good? Is this gonna work? Okay, so there's a couple of ways we can check that. The easiest is once all this information is inputted into the table, we can go down here and take a look at this. We can look at allowed wattage versus proposed wattage. Ideally, we want the proposed wattage to be lower than the allowed wattage, which means that we would be within compliance. That is the easiest check, the quickest check that you can have. But then to be completely sure, at the bottom of the screen, at the bottom left, there's gonna be this check compliance button. You click it, and then COMcheck will give you a green banner if it meets compliance, and it'll even tell you by how much you met compliance. If you don't meet it, it's gonna be red, and it'll tell you by how much you went over. Okay. Now, at this point, we've checked that compliance is good. We know that the lighting design does not go over energy requirements. It meets them. So now what we have to do is print the report in order to show them. But before we can get to printing the report, we have to go through this requirements. Now, we have to look at this subcategory of projects, interior lighting, and exterior lighting if it applies to our project. These requirements are things that COMcheck expects us to tell, hey, this is, COMcheck is pointing to us, hey, this is something that needs to be met in order to be compliant. And it allows us as the designer to go in and say, yeah, I am aware of this information, this is something that will be met. So when you click on these requirements, you will notice that it'll give you a short description of what it's telling you to account for. And then for the compliance options, usually it'll just give you the option to say the requirement will be met. And that is what we want to check. However, I encourage you not to simply click on requirement will be met and call it a day. Make sure you read this information, as this is important, this is very relevant to the project, and we need to make sure that whatever we're saying will be met is actually being met. So as you click through these guys, take the time to read them, make sure that this is accounted for and that these requirements are actually being met. Now, it's important to note too, some of these requirements, as you click through them, will have exceptions. Some of the requirements might not apply to your specific project, depending on the type of project, depending on the type of lighting design. You will see down here with the compliance choices an option that says does not apply. So make sure that you're being conscious about what you're selecting. Don't just click requirement will be met. If the requirement doesn't apply to the project, click that. And if you're not sure, ask. Okay. Now for the actual printing, At this point, we have set up everything. There's nothing else we need to do with COMcheck other than to print the report. So in the top right corner of the project window, there's this little button right here. We're gonna click the down arrow. We're gonna check the reports we want. So interior for sure, exterior if it applies. We check those, and then we go back and click reports. It'll generate this window, and then all you have to do is click on this hyperlink, and it'll give you a PDF of your report. Once you have the report, we can save it, we can store it, but at this point, you have completed the COMcheck purpose. You have gone through the COMcheck process, and you have printed your deliverable.
Do you have any involvement, not you personally, not so much for me,
Yeah.
in envelope or mechanical compliances?
So we as electrical do not. Mechanical compliance, if mechanical decides to use COMcheck, that they would do that on their own.
Mhm.
Building envelope, I believe would be architectural.
That's the architecture
Okay,
team.
yeah. Yeah, so that's besides our scope. So what we want to use COMcheck for is interior and exterior compliance.
And real quick, just to add on, as Alfredo mentioned, the advantage of the web-based platform is that everybody can log in and work in one project online, whereas with the desktop app, you need to have one file and everybody would have to log into that file. So if you have consultants and architectural teams and MEP engineers across different offices or across different firms, they might not all have access to that one file. And now you're passing this file around, you're kind of passing the baton. It's a little messier than the
Just
web app.
logging in and having it all in one
For errors.
Yep.
Well, so are there instances where we share the file with mechanical? Of course, we wouldn't be inputting anything about the equipment, but there's just one COMcheck for the project, you mean, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
It can be
for-
one file.
For the project, right, we don't need to make different files, we don't need to make different files for the different disciplines. It can all live in the same space. And one of the advantages of the web version is that, it doesn't have real-time work sharing, so multiple people can be editing at the same time. But you can log in, make your changes, save it, and then you can just log out of that account. And then mechanical can use the same credentials, log in, and do the work that they need within the same file. That way we don't need to be downloading, hey, here's an email with the file imported, we can all just work in the same space. Yeah, good questions. Anything else? All right. So finally, this is the last step of the COMcheck workflow. All we have to do is download the file, download the report, and save them in the correct locations. So as we talked earlier, this icon right here next to the project title will allow you to download the file. It'll download a .cxl file, which can be then used to, you can use that file to import it back into COMcheck in order to access our project. So say you go through your project, you download the file, and a couple months later you need to access the COMcheck for whatever reason. You can simply go find the downloaded file, import it back into COMcheck, and then go right back into editing. Okay. So once we have our report and we've downloaded our file, we want to save that in the correct location. So as Steve pointed out earlier, we are shifting our internal server's structure. So now most of the ongoing projects are going to be in the P drive. Any leftover projects that are still being worked on, they live in the V drive, but we want to store that information in the T drive. We're going to go to the project, go to the electrical folder, calculations, and then create a folder for COMcheck. It'll be the same for both of these structures.
Could I make a quick plug for
Yeah.
saving things to the network? So there's a lot of work that we do that, ultimately it's documentation of our engineering design. And this is less documentation of the design and more documentation of code compliance. So let's say like 3 or 4 years down the road, an authority having jurisdiction came and questioned us on this. We wouldn't want to not have this saved on our network. I think I said that right. We wouldn't want to have it not saved on our network, because what if COMcheck changed how they did things? What if they got hacked? What if they accidentally deleted their cloud, right? Or what if they just decided to discontinue that service altogether? We'd no longer have access to that information. So it's just important to save everything, both the PDF report and also the working file, to our network, so that if anything ever happens, we can recover it. And just everything on our network is backed up. So all of our work and documentation should be saved on the network, and then we have control over that information. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, perfect, alright, so that takes care of that. So now that we know how, well, we can before I go to that. Any questions on the workflow for COMcheck? At this point, we've covered beginning to end, how to generate that report, how to input all the information. If there are no questions on that, then I will continue and we can talk about some best practices for COMcheck, right? So I cannot stress this enough. Make sure that lighting fixture schedule is coordinated early. Make sure early on in the project you have the fixture types you need. Make sure you get all the information you need, wattage, lamps, because all that information will be extremely useful once we start putting the COMcheck together. Double check the square footage for each of the spaces that you're creating. Double check that with Revit. Like I said, you can also do that through Bluebeam. You can draw out the boundary, get that information. But the square footage should be coming from the architectural plans once we look at it. Make sure that you're using the right energy code. You don't want to get through the entirety of the COMcheck project, get to the very end, and then realize that you're using the wrong energy code. Because then you're going to have to go back, you're going to have to adjust things. Some of the rooms, LPDs might change, some of the rooms might not actually be recognized under the specific code. So make sure that this is set from the get-go. Also, double check that whatever you're putting on COMcheck matches what we have in our drawings, right? We don't want to be showing fixtures that are not correctly labeled in our drawings. We don't want to be have a mismatch of wattage for the same fixtures. So make sure that whatever we're putting in COMcheck matches what we're showing on the drawings. Read through the evaluations. Again, I cannot stress this enough. Do not simply just click requirement will be met. Go through the requirements, read them, make sure that whatever we're saying we will comply with, whatever requirement we're agreeing to meet, we are actually accounting for that. And I will throw a little plug in here. Steve is going to be double checking this. As I mentioned earlier, right? The COMcheck is required for the CD QA/QC process. Steve will go in and double check that those requirements that you're claiming are being met will actually be met. So do not incur Steve's wrath over a COMcheck.
I will double check that.
And finally, read through the report. Make sure that it looks right. You know, we don't want text to look weird. We don't want information to be wrong. We want to make sure that everything we've inputted matches with the actual information. In terms of important things to remember, once again, the COMcheck is needed for the CD, QA/QC, and signing and sealing. Steve will not sign any drawings if you don't provide a contract report. So just that alone makes this process very important. Also, COMcheck is not a replacement for AGI. Some of y'all are familiar with AGI, which is a design tool that allows us to visualize the calculated lighting as it is dispersed into the space. AGI is a design tool, COMcheck is a compliance report tool. They are both very essential for the lighting aspect of any project, but they both serve very different roles. Okay. Once again, lighting fixture schedule is important, use it. The web version of COMcheck is more effective and efficient, as we talked earlier. You have access to the latest version, the latest codes. There's work sharing involved, integrated into the web version, so it's a lot better. And then finally, the space-by-space method is preferred. It has higher and tradable LPDs, and it allows for more precise and complex. It's better for complex spaces, it's more precise. And I told you to take my word for it earlier, but now I'm actually going to show you that the space-by-space method is better. So let's take a quick example. Let's say that we have a building that has, let's say we're working in a space that is 500 square feet. Mainly offices, there's a couple of other things, but mainly offices, and let's say that there are 5 different fixture types throughout the space. So if we're doing building by building method, as we said, mainly offices, so we have to select office as our area category. And this is, I believe, based off of ASHRAE 90.1. Per the energy code, we get an LPD of 0.64 watts per square footage. So if we set that up in COMcheck, we have one area category, 500 square feet. We have the 5 different fixture types, which I took the liberty of adding fake number of fixtures and a fake wattages just for the sake of the demonstration. We input all of that into COMcheck. We run this compliance check. But before we hit the button to check for compliance, we can immediately take a look at this right here. So allowed wattage, which again is calculated based on the space and the area category. We see that we are allowed 320 watts, and our proposed design has 450 watts. So when I click check for compliance, what do you think is going to happen? Any guess?
It's going to shut you down.
It's going to tell you go try again. So it'll tell you that it does not meet compliance. It'll tell you that you're over by 41% and you're back to the drawing board. Or so you would think. Now, if we do this same process, but we instead use the space-by-space method, we can now break it down a little bit better. So it's mainly offices, but there are two two different office types. We have an open plan, similar to where most of us sit. We have enclosed offices where principals sit. We have a computer room, there's a conference room, and there's even a medical lab in that space. As you can see, the LPDs for these area categories differ significantly from this. The open plan is lower, but enclosed itself is already higher, and then these guys are significantly higher. So when we set this up in the COMcheck report, in the COMcheck software, sorry, we break it down by space category, we break it down by each of the fixtures, and as you can tell, it's the same information, same quantity, same wattage. But now the difference is that we have different area categories with different LPDs. So our allowed wattage shoots from 320 to 459. Proposed wattage is still the same, and when I click check for compliance, it passes by 2%. So the key takeaway from this is that breaking it down space by space, yes, it takes longer. It'll take a little bit more time and effort to set up, but it yields better results. Okay? And something else I wanted to point out here. So you can see here that for the open plan, we are allowed 61 watts, but our proposed is 100. This doesn't mean that the compliance check is going to fail. And here's what I meant by tradable LPDs are. So COMcheck, in order to meet compliance, you do not need to meet compliance at every single area category. The only thing that matters is the totals at the very end. So even though we're over here, because we're under in a couple of other space categories, that wattage can be used for a different area category. That's the tradable part coming in. And then, as you can see at the end, we are still within compliance because we have, in the total space, more wattage allowed than what we're actually proposing. Now, I wanted to give you a little insight into some lighting COMcheck that I've done. So this was at my first job. This was a lighting COMcheck that I had to do primarily by hand. Thankfully, we were in Capeman. We didn't have to also calculate the compliance check all by hand. But this building right here was a 10-story building. It was, as you can see, this is one side of the floor. This is the second side of the floor. It was a pretty big building, pretty big floor with a bunch of different area categories, a bunch of different lighting fixtures, and a whole lot of information that needed to be collected. These sheets right here are me breaking it down space by space, accounting for the fixture types, and then counting how many fixtures there were. I had to highlight each one of those to make sure that I wasn't going crazy and double counting things that I had already. So this is how COMcheck, and then I would take this information and put it into COMcheck, generate the report. This is what it would look like in Elden days when you were doing it by hand. Nowadays, we can actually streamline this process by using technology. Going back to Revit, we can actually have Revit generate, when we tag a space, it can tell us the square footage of each of those spaces, assuming that the architectural model was correctly set up and that we created these spaces within our model. We can get the tags to tell us the square footage. And then we can also get Revit to output a table that tells us the fixture type, tells us the wattage for each of those fixture types, and then it tells us which rooms they're associated to. It tells us the square footage of that room, and then it also tells us how many A1 fixtures are within this room. So this is kind of neat. And it takes a little bit of time to set up, but as you can imagine, outputting this table takes significantly less time than counting all of it by hand. And I will say, this table isn't perfect. It is not, unfortunately, streamlined. It does have some caveats, some pitfalls. And it is something that Steve and I have talked about. I've talked with Tom as well about this. And this is something that ideally we can sort out, get it to a point where we can use it from project to project to generate this information easier. But in case you're curious as to how that table was set up, you can create a new schedule, and you want to make sure that the information that we were displaying was the type mark, apparent load, the space name, number, and area, and then the count of fixtures. Now, the tricky part here was getting that space area. So even though Revit absolutely knows what that square footage is for the space, and if you click on the space, go to properties, it'll tell you what that space is. Revit doesn't actually allow you to take that information and output it into a table because Revit is Revit. So I got around it by creating a shared parameter, associating that shared parameter to spaces, and then I was able to get that space area to show up here, but it was blank. Because again, even though you found a workaround, Revit will find a way to screw you over. So instead, what I had to do was, and this works for a small project, because I can go in and for each of these spaces, just look at the square footage based on the tag, input it as a parameter into the space, and then it'll properly show up here. So as of right now, the space area is kind of tricky to get it to show up. In a small project, it's not an issue because you can just manually do that really quickly. It still beats having going back and calculating it by hand or using Revit just to draw the boundary. So creating this table, compiling this information is still a lot quicker than doing it by hand, and doing it even within Revit, doing it one at a time. But it does take a little bit of setup, and like I said, it's not perfect yet, but we're hoping to try to make it a little bit more streamlined. Okay.
These are the kinds of things that we're looking to get built into the Revit template. And you know, we've talked before introducing shared parameters and things we can do with shared parameters. So just any type of calculation like this, keep in mind there's often a way we can replicate things, at least to an acceptable degree within Revit, if we're not already doing that. And if there's ever an opportunity to automate something that you would otherwise have to do by hand, you know, let's always talk about it.
It won't be perfect from project to project. Even if we get it down to a science, it won't be perfect. There will still be some setup that is needed. But again, it cuts down a lot of the upfront legwork that you have to do. And with that, that's all I have for you guys in terms of COMchecks. If there are any questions, I am happy to entertain them. If there are not, we can take a look at the actual COMcheck software and maybe even take a look at some of the Revit stuff that I did.
Ultimately, like, responsibility for us goes to, we have to deliver it to Steve.
Correct. Yeah. And
But there's a lot of time, like TLP will do the interiors, we'll have to do the exteriors, it needs to be discussed on a project by project basis.
correct. Yeah. And actually, I'm glad you brought that up because that was something I forgot to touch upon. Yes. In the scenario where we rely on TLP to do the lighting design and the COMcheck as well, it's still our responsibility as the project engineer to get that COMcheck report to Steve, right?
Right.
Whether TLP designs it, I mean, it should be an open communication, right? TLP should be communicating with us, we should be communicating with TLP to make sure that this COMcheck report is being produced based on the information that we have, based on the lighting design that either they created or that we created. But this report should be put together, and then it is our responsibility to get it to Steve, so that Steve can use it for the QA/QC process.
Yeah, they're pretty open on that. They did the COMcheck for UMB, and send it to us, and then we also talk about it on Hudson Hall for Duke, so we're expecting for them to provide a COMcheck before. They're open and, you know, they don't have issue with providing COMcheck.
Okay. Anything else in regards to COMcheck? Cool. Well, hopefully this was useful. Like I said, it might seem a little intimidating at first, but COMchecks are pretty simple once you know what to do and how to set it up. And if you ever have any questions, any concerns with COMcheck, feel free to ask me. I am more than happy to help. I did an extensive amount of these at my first job, almost religiously so. So I am pretty comfortable with COMchecks. All right. Awesome. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah.
Great work.